Hi, everybody. We're going to get started. So my name's David Gisson. I think I know just about everybody in the audience, but I'm an associate professor of architecture here at CCA and the interim director of the architecture division. And tonight, it's such a pleasure to introduce Pier Vittorio Aureli, who made it here miraculously from a very snowy New York, well, tri-state area. So we're very happy that we were able to let him escape from the snow. So I think it's pretty amazing the career that Pier Vittorio Aureli has had in a very short time. In just a very short time, in 5-10 years, he's opened some very new ways, new spaces, to use a term he might use, for us to consider the relationship between architecture, the city, and its politics. His books, such as The Project of Autonomy and The Possibility of an Absolute Architecture, involve very close and novel readings of the ideas and imagery of a very diverse group of architects such as Palladio, Mies van der Rohe, Aldo Rossi, Andrea Bronzi, Matthias Ungers, among others. And it's always so much fun to read the books because you see an architect like Mies van der Rohe who's had so much, there's been so much writing about his work, but you suddenly see it in some completely new and novel way, which I find personally very exciting. So Pier Vittorio sees what he calls a project within the work of each of these architects, among others, and very likely, I think, in his own practice. And a project might be described as some type of ongoing exploration, obviously, but it's also, one could say, a type of life's work in which the possible stakes of architecture are completely enmeshed in forms of architectural representation and the writings that architects make. And it's a sort of ongoing mixture of these things that make the project. So in addition to reading Pier Vittorio, it's also exciting to watch him conjure his own highly provocative architecture out of empty spaces, plazas, and these white spaces that he draws or cuts out of urban and pastoral photos. I'm kind of embarrassed to be reading this in front of him. Okay, anyway, so I told him I toned it down a little. So with his office named Dogma, which is a fantastic name, Pier Vittorio has designed numerous urban master plans, including the award-winning proposal for a new administrative city in Korea, a project that I hope he shares with us tonight. So just a little bit more, okay? I'm just gonna embarrass you just a little bit more. Okay, so Pier Vittorio is an architect who imagines, I guess I would call it, it's just fun to write about your work, what can I say? Okay, so he is an architect who imagines what one would call another future for architecture. And by another future, I mean something that appears to be obviously not of the present, but it's without that kind of imagery or tropes of futurism or science fiction. It's a different kind of future. In other words, it's a future architecture that's not measured in technological terms. So it's fun to think about his work, and I can obviously go on all night, but why listen to me talk about his work when he's here to talk about it? So Pier Vittorio is joining us from Yale University, where he's a visiting professor of architecture. He's also an instructor at the Architectural Association in London. In 2006, his office Dogma won the first Iakov Chernikhov Prize for the best emerging architectural practice. And in 2013, on the occasion of the exhibition Dogma 11 Project at the Architectural Association, the first monographic work on the office was published by AA Publications. Please join me in welcoming Pier Vittorio.
Thanks, David, and thanks to all of you for coming to this lecture. Well, I'm very happy to be here in San Francisco. It's the first time I'm in this city, so I feel a bit out of place, especially for the projects and the things that I will show you tonight. I think I have to really say that in a way the work I will present you is very local. I mean, it very much refers to the place I come from, which is Europe, a place that right now is in not really a very good shape. And in a way, I think the work I will show to you reflects this kind of moment of rather painful transition from what used to be the essence of Europe, the welfare state, towards a new condition. Tonight, actually, I will show you projects which I did together with Martino Tattara, who is my partner at Dogma. I have to tell you that is a very rare occasion I do this. David was insisting that I should present you the projects. I usually don't like to do lectures on projects because I always didn't like to, usually I don't like architects talking about their projects. And also, in our case, well, first of all, we have done very few projects for reasons that I will explain. And also, one thing that we have always insisted in our work is really drawing. We have always gave a lot of importance to drawing, which for us is a language that doesn't need any explanation, especially, let's say, architectural drawing, which is also a very illustrative kind of drawing. And that's actually why I feel very uncomfortable to basically show you this work, which is mostly, in fact, represented through drawings, and talk about it. Anyway, I will try. Let's see. So Dogma was founded, let's say, I think 12, 11 years ago by myself and Martino Tattara. We were studying together in Venice, and actually since the time we were students, we started to work together. And from the very beginning, we had a big, let's say, interest towards urban design and urbanism, which was at that time a rather unpopular, let's say, thing to do. And in fact, this was also the reason why although actually Dogma was founded, I think in the early 2000s, we were very reluctant to make Dogma a practice with people working for us, because we really felt that we only wanted to concentrate on large-scale projects, on research projects. So we used, of course, teaching and research as a way to basically maintain ourselves, so that we would have the possibility to to do projects, but without, let's say, the pressure of doing them within the framework of an office, which we were extremely, let's say, afraid of. And then, of course, even if we have not increased our productivity, at a certain point, there was a necessity to have a more stable structure, which we just started less than 2 years ago. So this actually is a very important thing. So most of the projects are, let's say, large-scale projects. Sometimes they are projects we did for competitions. Recently, also, we had the opportunity to be selected for invited competitions. But also many projects, few projects are also done because exhibitions or invitations to take part to some research. And recently we are very much involved into research. So we had, let's say, succeed to have some sort of stable income, which comes especially from this research project, so that we in a way we can maintain this structure, but without making this structure too pervasive, let's say, in our life, so that we can still have time for teaching and especially writing, which for both of us is a very important part of our project. So this just to give you an idea of how we work from the very, let's say, daily life point of view. The first project I will show you is called Simple Arts, and actually it's, I would say, perhaps one of our most, what we consider within ourselves, one of the most important projects. It's a project that we started really at the beginning of Dogma, and it took the whole, let's say, it's a project that is really ongoing. Let's say it's a project that we developed within almost like 10 years. I will only show you a few images. And it's a project that deals with a place which is the northwestern metropolitan area of Europe, the place where, in fact, both myself and Martino live and practice. Is the area that stretches from, let's say, London to Frankfurt. It's the densest part of Europe, and also where the major, let's say, political institutions that lead Europe as a European Union are placed. And it's also a place where, in a way, one can see the very ethos of the European continent, where in fact production of knowledge, and especially the university, is becoming one of the most driving, let's say, economic, let's say, function within this country. So there is a huge density of schools and university, and in fact, this project is also a bit autobiographical, because myself and Martino have been touring a lot across this area, which include different countries, England, UK, Belgium, Holland, Germany, and even actually in a way the north of Switzerland. In fact, we both live in, we used to actually live in Holland. We now have moved to Brussels. I teach actually in London, Martino teach in Switzerland. And actually this is a very common condition of many people like us living in this area, where in fact the paradox is that this knowledge economy in a way really profit from this increasing mobility of people in this area. At the same time, this increasing mobility is also in a way manifest a new condition of precarity, which is very much affecting many people involved, especially in the university. Maybe something that is not the same here in US, but in Europe, this kind of increasing mobility within university is both one of the strengths through which university has become one of the most powerful economic engine of this country, but is also something that has made the life of people who study but also work in the university very, very precarious. And in fact, I have to say that this condition, the reason why we have worked on this project was really to reflect on something that we were very familiar with. And in fact, there is a subject that became very important in the development of this project, which I really would like to define through this very beautiful series of photographs done by Jeff Wall in the late 70s. It's a series of photographs of artists, students, and workers in their, let's say, 20s. Some of them were very close friends of Jeff Wall. And the title of this photograph series is called Young Workers. And in fact, it's interesting because already in the late 70s, Wall, in a way, through this work, defined this passage, from the iconic images of the working class. Think of the famous photographs by Walker Evans, where in fact the blue collar was the main protagonist of this particular class, to a new image of work, which was no longer the blue collar work, but the precarious worker, the young worker, the creative worker. Of course, what unfortunately Richard Florida has completely banalized as the creative class. And this is actually really the subject that is at the center of this project, which is a project for the university. It's an attempt to rethink the university as a kind of explicit political and economic scenario for this northwestern metropolitan area of Europe. There was also another very important reference for this project, which was this book and the movement that had behind this book, the Edu Factory movement, a group of people of which I was also part during a period of its history that started to basically rethink the university no longer as the ivory tower of knowledge as it used to be, but really as a place of production, which in fact one can compare, that has the same role that in a way the factory, the material factory, the Fordist factory had at the beginning of the 20th century. So in a way, one of the fundamental aspects of this movement was to really reconceptualize the university as a working place, and therefore as a place where to reconceptualize the relationship between let's say, workers and capital, and also the dynamics of class struggle. And of course, one of the focus of this movement was the transformation of the university after the beginning of the so-called Bologna process, which was a treaty initiated by the European Union that transformed the university, in fact, into an economic, entrepreneurial, let's say, institution, quite aggressively. In fact, making the university much more a for-profit, let's say, institution. At the same time, as I said before, introducing a kind of massive precarity within not only the students who actually see the fees rising more and more, but also the massive precarity among the teaching body. So in a way, what we wanted to do was a project that would in some way make explicit this kind of new condition. And in fact, there was a very important reference for us, which is a project done by Cedric Price in 1967 called Pottery Thinkbelt. I think you might know this project very well. It's a project that Price proposed for a region north-east of London, a region that at that time was has a big asset of infrastructure for kind of industrial production and mining, which was in decay, and Price proposed to transform this asset into a university campus, which is a very interesting, let's say, move that in a way can be seen as the anticipation of this transition that I have described with the rather clumsy name of post-Fordism. And of course, a very important aspect of this project was this railway network, which was existing, which Price saw as a sort of new playground in which to organize this rather, let's say, expanded campus that did not have any more sort of city-like scale, but really a regional scale. So this, what I've just described were, let's say, the stepping stones, that allow us to think about this project. And of course, the project had a site, which is the northwestern metropolitan area, especially the area around the cities that are the core of this region, which is Brussels, Amsterdam, and Cologne. And so our idea was to summarize, let's say, to compress this interest, this position into a very simple form, very simple archetype that would in a way made explicit this kind of big concentration of university and actually the economic and political role that they played in this region. So what we thought, what we proposed was a very simple frame made of students and researchers' room, since actually one of the things that started to be under attack with this starting of the Bologna process was really student housing, which was one of the most explicit, let's say, emblem of the university supported by the welfare state. Today, actually, there are still a lot of student housing in Europe, but they are privately, let's say, developed and are actually one of the main source of exploitation of students, but also increasingly also adjunct researchers. So the idea was to propose this simple frame that would contain all these rooms, and while actually the rest of the university would be left, let's say, unplanned, since actually today the university itself has become the city. So university is no longer this kind of clearly defined typological architecture that we used to inherit from the past. Think of the Jefferson model, but something that in a way tends to almost coincide with the city itself. So these are actually the rooms, and the rooms actually were thought as a very simple sequence of inhabitable walls that would contain all the necessary equipment and allow these people basically to live and study basically in the same place. So this frame would actually be placed in all the cities that form this loop that I described before, that links the city of Amsterdam, Cologne, and Brussels. each frame would actually occupy one specific site next to the central station. And actually here there was something very important. Most of these areas are now actually made of mostly of office spaces that are vacant, so that they are basically under use, which is one of the fundamental threats of the real estate value of these places. So one of our proposal was to simply occupy these spaces and transform them into places in which these people could basically self-organize themselves. And actually, here you see all the projects actually cited in these areas. And as you can see, we were extremely contextual. So Dordrecht, Utrecht, Rotterdam, Den Haag, Antwerp, Brussels, Liège, Leuven, Eindhoven, Köln, Düsseldorf, Mechelen, Aachen, Roosendaal, Duisburg, Delft, Ghent, Amsterdam. So each, as you can see in this drawing, each unit frame, in fact, an existing part of the city. So the idea is to cover the space in between with an hypostyle room, so to really transform the entire city into a sort of endless interior. In fact, I would say that the project for us was already a radicalization of something that is already happening, in fact, in the way universities are increasingly designed as a kind of endless lounge spaces, where in fact informal gathering, informal meetings become more important than the way actually the classroom and the different kind of functions of the university were previously composed. And then actually the ground floor of this building is reclaimed as a space where activities can be organized. Actually, we had drawn all this. I will show you only a few examples, but for the whole site that you have seen, we have drawn the plan, which actually was for us really an attempt almost to redraw the ground floor of these cities, and by redrawing to reclaim it in a way. So the second project is a competition, which we did, I think, in 2004 or 2005, if I'm not wrong. And as I told you, we only wanted and still actually try to work on large-scale projects, so there are not many opportunities to find projects or competitions of that scale. And all of a sudden, we realized that in South Korea, there was, especially since 2003, 2004, there was a great urge to design new cities. I think this is also had to do with the fact that South Korea in the 90s had massive political struggles. So in the early 2000s, the government decided to, in a way, position to dismantle actually the existing institutional infrastructure within Seoul and to disperse this kind of infrastructure within other parts of the region. And so they started to develop basically cities where to actually host these new administrative functions. And in 2005, they launched a big exhibition for the new administrative city, actually de facto the new capital city of South Korea, which of course for legal problem couldn't become in fact the new capital city, but in fact is a city that is going to host all the major political and economic institutions of South Korea. Actually, it's a project that was initiated by the government, which for us was a very interesting issue. So it's not a project by developers, but really a project where the state took a rather forceful lead in establishing this new framework. And so we decided to team up with an office from Ghent at that time. They are now based in Brussels, Kirsten Geers and David van Severen, and enter this competition and try to actually not to fulfill completely the brief, which was really asking for the design of a city. From the very beginning, we took a very critical stance towards this kind of idea of making out of this new administrative hub a city. Of course, the brief was flooded with all these rather saccharine platitudes about public space, and so we really wanted to, in a way, counter this kind of attempt to make a city that would not take, that would, in a way, not confront the fact that it actually was, the idea was born under very specific circumstances. So the project was very simple. We really tried to reduce, as usually we do in all the projects, as you see, the problem into one specific form. In this case, was a very simple cruciform building, which was 70 meters long, 10 stories high. And in a way, we imagined, which actually was simply the appropriation of the traditional Korean apate, the apartment building that builds basically the 99% of Seoul. Which in fact host both housing and office space. And we made actually this building a cruciform building in order to, in a way, create a sort of point of reference for further development. So the idea was to use this very simple building as a sort of background for further development of the city. So the space in between the different, let's say, sides of the cross could either remain empty, so it was almost like a square, or they could be filled with further program. And the composition of these different, as you can see in this sketch, the composition of these different cruciform buildings would form this sort of courtyards. In fact, the whole project was a sort of inversion of the traditional relationship between block and street. In this case, the street becomes this series of cruciform buildings, and the city becomes this kind of enfilade of rooms. Actually, when we entered the competition, of course, we had no idea about South Korea. As usually happens, when you do these competitions, you cannot even visit the site, but we were very interested in especially I've always been interested in ancient Chinese cities, where in fact the wall play a very important role in defining actually the city. And in fact, the idea was to make a city out of walls, basically, to use this building not just as a building, as a self-standing slab, as it is in fact the apate, but really as an element that would define a sequence of walls that would absorb, in fact, the 70% of the program and leave the rest basically potential within these spaces. So this was actually the settlement principle, and in a way this drawing for us was immediately showing the tension between these very rather generic structures and all the rest that would be developed within this building. And the plan actually was in fact a square. So in a way the same square of the courtyard would become also the form of the city. The square was something like 3 kilometers by 3 kilometers, and it was carefully inserted in the flattened part of the area, so leaving the mountains all around, so that the mountains would be, let's say, the limit, not so much the shape of the city, but the limit would be, in fact, this series of mountains around the city, as you can see actually in the model. And of course, a very important aspect of this project was to imagine the possible. Of course, it was a project for which phasing was very important. When you design at this scale, you have to imagine the project being developed in stages. And a very important principle of our project was that the construction of the city would start from the edge. So the edge would be the first things being built, and in fact also the circulation would reinforce the role of the edge. In fact, all the parking and station areas would be on the edge, and then a series of loops of tram and light rail transportation would allow the city to be accessed in all its parts. But this issue of growth from the edge for us was a very important principle, so that the city would not expand from the center to the periphery, but from the edge towards the center. Of course, we decided to leave the buildings completely unspecified. Actually, we drew the plan, which I didn't have a slide, but the envelope was completely undefined. And in fact, the technique that David was referring before, it was actually a way to really stress the generic character also of these structures. Also because if we would have used the kind of building we were referring to, the traditional apathe, we thought that the jury would consider these monstrosities, since they hate these buildings, which are actually quite beautiful, very brutal, very simple, but very effective in really constructing the city. So we decided to leave this kind of white silhouette. Of course, the project was, as I said before, also very cynical and slightly ironical towards their ambition to have identity within this city. So we sort of played with that sort of ambition, but also in a slightly exaggerated way. But at the same time, of course, for us was very important the idea of reducing actually the whole project to a very simple settlement principle, which became actually the most important aspect of the project. This is actually a very recent project which we did for the Venice Biennale. Which is I was talking before with David, is a place that I really hate. I mean, I don't come from Venice. I've been studying Venice, and the period of the Venice Biennale is the worst period to stay in Venice. In fact, we were not invited by the curator, David Chipperfield, but by Peter Eisenman, who was invited by Chipperfield, and he was asked to invite other people with whom he would share, let's say, his common ground, which was the title of this exhibition. And Peter invited us to work on a project on the Piranesi's Campo Marzio. And I have to say that at the beginning we were extremely reluctant to participate to this project. In fact, first because the Biennale, because as I said, is a rather disgraceful event. Second, because we're really afraid to work on such a project. I mean, Campo Marzio is for us one of the most important references in our work, and we really had no idea what to do with something like that, to work on this project. And because actually Peter really insisted, that we finally decided to do something with this theme. So, well, you know, the Campo Marzio is a sort of project that Piranesi published in 1762. And in fact, the Campo Marzio was part of an even larger, let's say, work, which is the Antichità Romane, the most important portfolio by Piranesi, which is a very strange kind of work. Still today is very sort of enigmatic work, because it's very unclear whether it's an archaeological reconstruction of ancient Rome. The Campo Marzio is this area below the Tiber, which is today still called Campo Marzio, but in fact the strange things of this plan is that Piranesi shifted the center on the upper part, which has nothing to do, in fact, with the Campo Marzio. It's very unclear whether it's an archaeological reconstruction, is a project, is a polemic. But of course, the most important, the most iconic plate of the whole project is this iconographia, the plan of the Campo Marzio, which has very peculiar issues. The first one, that Piranesi actually completely got rid of two fundamental datum that in fact were very important in the architecture of ancient Rome. One, of course, are housing. Of course, one has to say that Campo Marzio itself, I mean, the area, which is this one, didn't really have housing, but all the rest there was housing. And in fact, in the Piranesi's reconstruction, housing completely disappeared. And of course, the other thing that disappeared are streets. Especially, actually, one of the most important streets, which was the Corso. In fact, the Cardo of Rome, which in fact in this supposed to be archaeological construction completely disappeared. So in a way, one of our interpretation of Campo Marzio is that can be almost seen as a radical critique of what at that time was becoming the modern city, by in fact eliminating from the city the two most important biopolitical tools that have managed the growth of the modern city, housing and circulation. And in fact, the other thing that is very evident in his project is the lack of any typological framework. Piranesi, in fact, almost accumulate in this plan all his archaeological findings also from other places. And what actually really this plan lacks is any typological, let's say, consistency. So there is no actually a typological order that govern this composition of public spaces, in fact. If not, the only element that remains evident in this composition is the wall. The wall for Piranesi becomes the only element that through which, let's say, the city can be formalized. And in fact, if one look to especially Piranesi's work, the Antiquità, but also the Vedute, it's quite amazing that he gave a lot of emphasis to walls-like architectures. So he seems to ignore all the most especially in the Antiquità, the most important monuments of ancient Rome, and those monuments that in fact were often visited by people from abroad, and focus on rather humble, sometimes hidden structures that always have this consistency of walls, like for example in the wall of the Trajan Forum. And in a way you can see this kind of interest for everything that looks like a wall or a dike, or some kind of linear structure that, or aqueducts. Of course, Piranesi has a huge passion for aqueducts, actually ruins that at that time had very little, that would solicit little interest for visitors. And yet for him, this was really the essence of his reinterpretation of ancient Rome, which we found very interesting and very often overlooked by especially historians of Piranesi. This interest that Piranesi has for wall structures, which he actually depicts in all kinds of possible ways. So our project was really to finally make explicit this aspect of Piranesi's work in the simplest form possible, an inhabitable wall, which would be 60 meters high, approximately the same height of the Colosseum, which is actually Piranesi's favorite ancient Roman ruin. This wall would be imagined as a sort of concrete opus, where in fact the whole idea was that it would neither be housing nor any public, let's say, space, but simply an inhabitable structure that would not have any typological reference, if not the simple linearity of the wall. And of course, these walls would be superimposed to the existing iconographia. So the top of the walls would be very solid, very consistent, but the moment these walls would be lent to the existing plan, they would melt and transform according to the existing structures. Actually, this is a plan that we have redrawn by ourselves, so it's not the Piranesi plan. And it took us actually a lot of time, really a lot of time to, I think we spent like 2 months, the whole office actually redrawing this plan. I have to say this was one of the things for which the whole project was worth to do it, to have this possibility to redraw this amazing plan. In fact, at the end, our project was just a way to make let's say, the existing more, let's say, important and to superimpose the most banal, simple structure that would also emphasize something that is often overlooked in the Piranesi's plan, which is the gardens in between the buildings. And in fact, this kind of linear structure that exists within the walls were an attempt to extend the gardens that forms very often the in-between space of the ruins. These are the sections of the wall, and basically the idea of having this kind of endless sections was really to undermine any typological, let's say, consistency of this wall. We did endless sections. The top is always the same, the ground always change. So the next 3 projects are dealing with one topic, one subject that is increasingly something that interested us, which is housing. Very banal subject, but for us very important. And the projects are dealing with public housing, are 2 competitions and 1 research project, which we did for this, let's say, institution that in Europe is again very much debated after years of neglect. The first project, the 2 first projects are in Belgium. Actually, it's very interesting because Belgium, very similar to US, was actually one of the few European countries that from the very beginning of industrialization had a very strong bias towards public housing. And in fact, what the Belgian government did already in the 19th century quite strongly was to encourage private ownership and to encourage actually even workers, even people with modest means to buy their own house and not in the city. This is actually the reason why Belgium has this huge amount of railway infrastructure, but also huge, one of the most dense sprawl conditions in Europe. In fact, there is a classic thing that when you see the famous image of the world at night, one of the most lighted spots of the world is basically Flanders. But of course, it's a place where this sort of process of insisting really on ownership has also backfired, especially in the last years, not only because the urban sprawl, which has made basically the building of infrastructure quite impossible, but also that ownership is becoming less and less affordable, especially for, let's say, new generations who actually tend to leave many of these towns, which are in the middle of the sprawl, and go to actually the cities. But also many of these, let's say, these towns are now actually trying to reinitiate programs of affordable housing, public housing, in order to invert this trend. So the first competition is for a city called Aalst, which in the next years will build a huge amount of public housing. And so they did a competition, and we were invited to participate. Of course, we were the only, let's say, team that tried to define the intervention from really an urban scale. Most of the other teams, in fact, only tried to somehow adapt public housing to existing domestic typologies that are being very much developed in Belgium, also because public housing in Belgium, but also in Germany, has a huge stigma. So there is a really sort of pressure to, in a way, try to camouflage public housing with a, let's say, an atmosphere, an image of the privately owned house. And the other problem is that when it comes to public housing, there is a lot of uncertainty in terms of typologies, because of course many people still refers to the traditional social housing for basically the worker, for the working class, while actually today the user of this public housing are people who have much different also way of dwelling into space, like for example young couples, but also people like students or people who live, work in the creative industry, which actually are less and less able to maintain their own, let's say, housing capabilities within the city. And so, in fact, our main preoccupation was to really insist, to really focus on the typological aspect of this project. Our project was very simple. It was a series of strips that would organize these, let's say, housing bars. And in fact, the bars were laid out in such a way to create gardens in between, some of them private gardens, some of them public, but let's say that this kind of distinction between the private and the public garden would be up to the residents to decide, while the structure was very much defined according to a similar rhythm. But actually, one of the most important aspects of this project was really the plan of the houses. As you see, actually, all the houses are defined by this structure that is 12 meters long and 4 meters large. It's a kind of tunnel. So all the architecture of the houses is organized according to this structure, but then by sliding slightly the walls, opening doors at different, let's say, positions, a certain kind of degree of flexibility is introduced. So actually you can see that very well here. This actually was the conceptual drawing where you see all the rooms are the same. So in a way, all the houses are made of rooms that have the same size. But then according to these openings, you can have rather larger or smaller apartments, or you can also have different spatial arrangements according to these openings. So this is actually the drawing that really shows that. So in a way, the first module is really the basic let's say, existence minimum, which is this kind of tunnel that contains all the basic services. And then starting from that, you have all possible expansions and articulations of the house. But from the outside, basically, the system is always the same. So in a way, what happens is that from outside, the structure looks always the same. So it's a very uniform architecture, while inside always change, which is exactly the opposite of the way housing is designed today, where in fact the facade is always different, with all these kind of sliding windows, and then the interiors are always the same. So here you see actually all the transformations, and you see the interior. Now there's always this kind of composition of sliding walls. So in a way, the interiors are always the same and always different. And actually, this was also very important for us, how then these houses can again structure the entire landscape and not being just bungalows that land into the existing condition. Also, I think this drawing shows something that is very strong in, I think, in our work, which is this sometimes a kind of deliberately naive way to represent green or nature, which we do with a certain sadic pleasures in order to somehow also mirror this kind of false consciousness that exists today about landscape and nature, which sometimes I found one of the major blockage of any serious discussion about landscape, which, by the way, is very important. And in this project, actually, we, in a way, developed further this idea, this time by reducing all the facilities of the house within a simple wall, so that the rest of the house would be completely freed and flexible to organize in different ways. Actually, one of our major preoccupation in this public housing is to allow people to use these domestic spaces not only actually for life, but also for working. So eventually they can become also atelier or workshop. So it's very important that all the facilities, all the fixed facilities are concentrated in this wall. So this project was a pilot project like the first one, which eventually would be implemented in different parts of this region. And the idea was to simply have this simple structure made of walls. And also that the whole composition would be done in such a way that most of the land where these projects are landing would remain a common garden, could remain free. So you see the contrast between this bungalow-like development and this structure that really emphasizes the edge as a fundamental principle organizing all the, let's say, common spaces. You see also this idea of the tunnel, no? The house that is reduced to the wall and so leave unobstructed the space from side to side. So here actually you see the different walls, and in a way the wall becomes also contain all the furniture of the house. And I think this image for me is very, very important. So this idea of emptiness, no? Which in a way shows both the potential of the space, but also the precarity in which we dwell today, you know, where we are constantly uprooted and we have no longer idea of how to really dwell into space. So the best way perhaps to dwell is to really confront this emptiness. And here comes the last project. So I'm almost done. I hope you have still some stamina to support this. Actually, this is an ongoing project. It's a part of research we are doing on new living and working typologies. And actually, it's an attempt to really imagine the domestic space as a space of production. So it's a project at the end, it's a building that we have proposed for the city of Tallinn. We were asked to, to consult the municipality about an area in the city of Tallinn, which is the capital of Estonia. And at the same time, we were also invited to participate to an exhibition with a rather ambiguous title of Recycling Socialism. And we were asked actually to make an intervention to a station which was in the area where then we had proposed our project. Of course, one part of this project was a research on domestic typologies that in the course of history have been thought also as productive space, such as the American Woman House by the Becker's sisters, which in fact try to imagine the traditional ballon frame domestic structure as a space where the kitchen and all the, let's say, facilities related to domestic labor are concentrated in the middle, and the whole space around is emptied out. So in a way, the house loses its, let's say, traditional gender and symbolic spatial organization, and the whole issue of domestic labor is radically exposed. I think this is a very interesting housing prototype, which for us was very important. Another very interesting example that for us was a stepping stone into our project was this house for 1 or 2 persons by Mosen Ginsburg for his Green City project, which is one of the few examples of housing, social housing, which was thought not through, let's say, apartment buildings, but through rooms for single persons, which for us actually is a very important idea because one of the biggest problems of domestic space today, especially when it comes to public housing, is that the nuclear family is the only reference. So no other subjects are considered within, let's say, the scenario of domestic space. And it's interesting that in the early period of the Soviet Union, there were a lot of experiments into imagining domestic space beyond the nuclear family, by, in fact, imagining new forms of association, like, for example, also to live alone, like a monk. or to live with one person eventually. And we thought that this kind of experiments today might be very helpful to really go beyond this taboo of the nuclear family, and to find new forms of living together which are not, let's say, bound to this form of association. Another, in fact, in that same line of thought, another very interesting project that for us was very important is the high-rise building in the linear city of Magnitogorsk by Ivan Leonidov, which is very interesting because it really tried to combine a sort of hotel-like situation with single rooms that share a bathroom with a sort of collective common atrium. So Leonidov really was trying to combine domestic space and more kind of collective space, but at the same time, what I think is very interesting in these two projects is that the collective space is never forced upon individuals. So in a way, there is a very interesting fine-tuning between collectivity and individuality, which is exactly what we have lost in our way of dwelling, where we are never actually collective nor individual. We never have a possibility to really share space with others, but at the same time, we never have the possibility to be alone and completely disconnected from others, which actually is one of the reasons why, especially with our increasingly precarious life, dwelling becomes extremely tense and very sometimes frustrating. And I think this project really tried to combine these two conditions, collectivity, but also radical individuality. And then another very interesting project for us that we really wanted to explore as a possibility to reflect also on the way living and working becomes basically the same thing is, of course, something that you can see here in this plan, which I guess you all know what it is. If not, is the Silver Factory, the studio of Andy Warhol. Actually, the quintessential post-Fordist space of life and work, which was active 24 hours. And in fact, Warhol had completely blinded the windows and wrapped, of course, the space with a silver foil to really make this kind of interior condition very, very strong. And of course, it was a space where people would work and live. And it's interesting that Warhol really used this idea of the factory. So he was an artist, but he really challenged this idea of the atelier or the studio with this rather, let's say, rough kind of atmosphere of production. And in fact, this was a very important sort of stepping stone for our project. So the project actually is this one. It's a living unit for 1 or 2 persons, eventually even 3, which is organized around a room of 6 meters by 6 meters, with the height of 6 meters. And actually all the fixed equipment is concentrated in the middle, the bed, the bathroom, and the kitchen and everything. And then the room actually simply defined around this structure. So you see actually a very simple drawing. Actually, we had even built, unfortunately I don't have any photo here, even built a mock-up of this model to test actually the proportions. The idea is to have a very small apartment with a very generous ceiling, so to completely change the typical proportions of domestic space to do something that really is much smaller, but has a much higher, let's say, space. So here you see the possible composition of these rooms, how sometimes actually they can merge in larger entities, but always concentrate the basic living functions in these cores. So the idea is also that there's 3 or 4 of these rooms share a common space for work. This common space is slightly larger than, let's say, especially the core, in order to allow also people from outside to use eventually these spaces. So in a way, it's having, let's say, a sort of studio and living space almost on the same floor. So this is actually the building, the unité d'habitation that we had in mind as a kind of result of this new spatial arrangement. And this is actually the section. And you see actually how the plan and the section have basically the same proportions. As I said, we proposed this building for Tallinn, because actually Tallinn is a city that is now economically booming, but at the same time there is this a huge population of creative workers that in fact play a fundamental role in the economy of the city, but they are quite dispersed within the city. They are really left on their own, and of course they are very often used as a kind of gentrified pioneers to, in a way, colonize areas of the city. And after actually this process is done, of course, they are expelled into further areas of the city. So in a way, by proposing this project, we started to open up the debate about how these, let's say, people are on one hand playing a fundamental role in the economy of the city, but they don't get any support, any actually visibility within the city itself. And so we proposed this project almost as a kind of phalanx to host them and to give them the possibility to live and work very close actually to the city center in the very site of the station. The thing is that this is actually the site plan with a project superimposed to these factories that are already used as they're already occupied as ateliers. So in a way, our project was simply to complement this existing condition. So this is actually the project and the station. Actually, funny things, we were asked to do an intervention within the framework of this exhibition of recycling socialism within the station. And of course, it was supposed to be another of these art projects where you try to reflect on the symbolic aura of this heroic socialist architecture. And in fact, we proposed this project in polemic to this idea of fetishizing socialism as a kind of heroic period. In fact, trying to rethink socialism within today, within the conditions of today, which had nothing to do with the heroic image of the past and had to do with the grim reality of people like us who try to actually survive within these cities that are becoming increasingly unaffordable. So this is actually the project, which is simply the composition of these rooms that I have shown you before. Actually, it's interesting that the project really sits in the area almost like a wall that, in fact, in a way has also a certain aggressive character towards the city in order to mitigate this friendly atmosphere that usually is the perfect fertile ground in which gentrification happen. So the idea was to really have an aesthetic that would really demystify this kind of kindness, this kind of picturesque, hipster picturesque, that's in a way is today one of the biggest Trojan horse through which, in a way, gentrification happen. These actually are the rooms and how they are composed together, and these actually are these images. We really try to propose a space that is both, in a way, harsh, but also has a certain kind of monumentality, exactly like these pictures of Jeff Wall that I've shown you at the beginning, this kind of a contrast between a certain social realist ethos and the conditions in which we dwell today. The transformations of these rooms, which are always the same and always different. And of course, finally, on the ground floor, the whole structure is exposed. Of course, no cafe, no exhibition space, just empty, public space, empty, boring public space. And of course, the also exterior is very mute, very banal, very simple. I mean, we are very interested in this kind of idea of having a very rich interior and a very boring and uniform exterior. And in fact, I would like to conclude maybe with this image, where in fact architecture is really reduced to a frame. And what actually becomes more important is the life that eventually can organize itself within this frame. And I have to say that for us, although our projects always stop on this edge of providing an image, at the end actually what we do in our work is to construct images of a possible form of life that can take place. Of course, we never design this form of life, but in a way we always are putting forward this image with the idea that what might happen within this frame might be even more important than architecture itself. Thank you.